I was scrolling through Reddit on my lunch break when I came across a post that made my stomach clench with familiar rage. A young woman was describing how her sister had stolen her entire college fund, $35,000 that their grandmother had left specifically for her education, and how their parents had not only refused to make her sister pay it back, but had actually defended the theft by saying, "Family is more important than money," and "she needed it more than you did." The comments section was absolutely brutal. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed. Because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. How can parents be so blind to favoritism? One person wrote. This is financial abuse, plain and simple, said another. I would never speak to any of them again, declared a third. The original poster had updated her story to say that her sister had used the money for a luxury vacation to Europe and a brand new car, while she was forced to take out crushing student loans just to afford community college. What made my blood run cold wasn't just the cruelty of the story. It was that I was reading it while sitting in the exact same coffee shop in downtown Millbrook where, just 2 weeks ago, my own parents had told me they were disappointed in my attitude about my sister Vanessa stealing my college fund. The same coffee shop where they had looked me in the eye and said that I was being selfish and vindictive for expecting them to do anything about it. But here's what my parents didn't know when they chose my manipulative, golden child sister over their daughter who had worked 3 jobs to save every penny for her education. I wasn't just some naive 22-year-old they could gaslight into submission. I was a woman who had spent 4 years studying business and finance, who understood exactly how their precarious financial situation worked, and who had been quietly gathering evidence of their hypocrisy and lies for months. Let me tell you how I went from being the family scapegoat to the one holding the deed to the house they thought they'd never lose. It all started 18 months ago when I was a senior at Riverside University, working 2 part-time jobs while maintaining a 3.8 GPA in my finance program. I had been incredibly fortunate. My great-aunt Cordelia had left me a college fund worth $42,000 when she passed away during my sophomore year. She had always been the black sheep of the family, a successful businesswoman who never married and had no children of her own. In her will, she specifically stated that the money was for my great-niece Natalie's education and for no other purpose whatsoever. The money had been sitting in a trust account managed by my parents, David and Patricia Winters, since I was too young to access it when Aunt Cordelia died. The arrangement was that they would transfer portions to me each semester to cover tuition, books, and living expenses. It had worked perfectly for 2.5 years, until suddenly, it didn't. In November of my senior year, just 3 months before graduation, I went to check my account balance to ensure I had enough for my final semester. The account was empty. Completely empty. Not just low. $0.00. I called my mother immediately, assuming there had been some kind of banking error, or that maybe they had transferred the money to a different account without telling me. "Mom, there's something wrong with the college fund account," I said, trying to keep the panic out of my voice. "It's showing a 0 balance, but I should have at least $8,000 left for spring semester." There was a long pause on the other end of the line. "Natalie, honey, we need to talk about this in person. Can you come home this weekend?" "Mom, what's going on? Where's my money?" "It's complicated. Just come home and we'll explain everything." That was the first red flag. In a family where my parents had always been straightforward about financial matters, "it's complicated" was not an answer I had ever heard before. I drove the 2 hours from Riverside to my hometown of Willowbrook that Friday evening with a growing sense of dread. My parents' house, a modest 3-bedroom colonial where I had grown up, felt different somehow when I walked through the front door. Tenser. Like everyone was walking on eggshells. Poe? My younger sister Vanessa was there, which immediately put me on edge. Vanessa was 25, 3 years older than me, and had been the goal. "Hi, Nat," she said, with what I now recognize as guilt-tinged false cheerfulness. "How's school going?" "It would be going better if I knew where my college money went," I replied, not bothering to hide my suspicion. My parents exchanged one of those looks that married couples share when they've already discussed exactly what they're going to say. My father cleared his throat. "Natalie, sit down. We need to explain what happened." What they explained was that Vanessa had been going through a, quote, really difficult time. She had lost her job at the marketing firm, fired for chronic tardiness, though they didn't mention that part. Her boyfriend had broken up with her, and she was struggling with depression and anxiety. She had come to them in tears, saying she didn't know how she was going to pay rent or even buy groceries. "She was in such a dark place," my mother said, tears forming in her eyes. "We were genuinely worried she might hurt herself. So we made the decision to loan her some money from your college fund," my father continued. "Just temporarily, to get her back on her feet. She's going to pay it back." "How much?" I asked, though I already knew the answer from the empty account. "The full amount," my mother admitted quietly. "But Natalie, she's family. Family helps family. And you're so responsible, we knew you'd figure out how to finish school even without the money." I stared at them in complete disbelief. "You gave Vanessa my entire college inheritance? The money that Aunt Cordelia specifically left for my education?" "It's not your money until you turn 25, Vanessa said with a smugness that made my blood boil. "Technically, it was in Mom and Dad's control, and they chose to help their daughter who was in crisis instead of their daughter who has everything handed to her." Everything handed to me. I had worked 3 jobs throughout college while maintaining a near-perfect GPA. I had spent every summer working full-time instead of taking vacations. I had lived in the cheapest dorm rooms, eaten ramen noodles for dinner more nights than I could count, and hadn't bought new clothes in 2 years. Meanwhile, Vanessa had been living rent-free in our parents' basement for the past 6 months while figuring herself out. "What did you spend it on?" I asked her directly. "I don't think that's any of your business," she replied with a flip of her perfectly styled hair that definitely hadn't been cut at great clips. But I already knew what she had spent it on because I followed her on social media. The photos from her 3-week trip to Italy and France were still on her Instagram. The pictures of her brand new BMW were still on her Facebook. The designer handbags and expensive dinners at trendy restaurants were documented for all to see. $42,000 for a quarter-life crisis shopping spree and European vacation. As I sat in that coffee shop reading about someone else's identical betrayal, I realized something that would change everything. I wasn't going to be the family victim anymore. I was going to be the one who fought back. And I was going to win. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time. So if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. To understand how devastating this betrayal truly was, you need to know who I was before my family destroyed my trust in them completely. I wasn't some spoiled college kid expecting handouts. I was someone who had worked for every single thing I'd ever achieved. My name is Natalie Winters, and at 22, I had already built a life that most people twice my age would be proud of. I was 3 months away from graduating summa cum laude from Riverside University with a degree in finance and business administration. My professors had been encouraging me to apply for graduate programs, and I had already received a preliminary job offer from Sterling Financial Group, one of the most prestigious investment firms in the state. But none of that had come easily. Growing up in Willowbrook, a middle-class suburb about 30 miles outside the state capital, I learned early that if I wanted something, I had to work for it. My parents, David and Patricia, the difference between me and my sister Vanessa couldn't have been more stark. While Vanessa spent her teenage years focused on social activities, dating, and somehow convincing our parents that mediocre grades were good enough, I was the one with my nose in books, working part-time jobs and planning for my future. When I was 16, I started working at Manny's Pizza after school and on weekends, making $8.50 an hour and saving every penny I could. While Vanessa was getting a car for her 16th birthday, a used Honda Civic that my parents somehow scraped together $6,000 to buy. I was riding my bike to work in all weather, determined to buy my own car with my own money. By senior year of high school, I had saved enough to buy a 1998 Toyota Corolla with 180,000 miles on it. It wasn't pretty, but it was mine, and I had earned it. Vanessa made fun of it constantly, calling it the rust bucket. But I was proud of that car because it represented something she would never understand: the satisfaction of achieving something through your own effort. College was supposed to be my escape from the family dynamics that had shaped my entire childhood. Vanessa had always been the center of attention, the pretty one, the charming one, the one who could talk her way out of any trouble and into any favor. She was homecoming queen, prom queen, and somehow convinced everyone that her struggles were everyone else's responsibility to fix. I, on the other hand, was the responsible one, the one who never asked for anything, never caused problems, and always found a way to handle things myself. When I got accepted to Riverside University, my parents made it clear that they couldn't help with college expenses beyond what Aunt Cordelia's inheritance would cover. "We're just not in a position to contribute much," my mother had explained apologetically. "Between the mortgage and your father's medical bills from his surgery last year, we're still catching up." I understood. I didn't expect them to pay for my college when they were struggling themselves. That's why I was so grateful for Aunt Cordelia's gift. Cordelia Hartwell had been my great-aunt on my mother's side, and she was everything the rest of my family wasn't. She was independent, successful, and had built a thriving consulting business from nothing. She never married, never had children, and was often described by family members as difficult or too focused on money. But I loved her. Aunt Cordelia was the one who taught me about compound interest when I was 12. She was the one who explained the stock market to me when I was 14. She was the one who encouraged me to think bigger than Willowbrook, to pursue education and career opportunities that would give me real financial independence. When she died suddenly of a heart attack during my sophomore year, I was devastated. But I was also incredibly touched to learn that she had left me her education fund, $42,000 that she had been saving specifically for my college expenses. The will was very specific: to my great-niece Natalie Winters, for the sole purpose of funding her higher education. This money is not to be used for any other purpose, and I trust that her parents will ensure it is used exactly as intended. My parents had been named as trustees of the fund until I turned 25, which seemed like a reasonable arrangement at the time. They would transfer money to me each semester to cover tuition, books, and living expenses, and I would provide them with receipts and documentation to show how every dollar was being spent. The system worked perfectly for 2.5 years. Every semester, they would transfer exactly what I needed. No more, no less. I was incredibly careful with the money. By my senior year, I was on track to graduate with minimal debt and a substantial amount left over that I planned to use for graduate school or as a down payment on a small apartment once I started my career. I had my entire future mapped out, and for the first time in my life, I felt like I was in control of my own destiny. I was working as a tutor in the campus writing center and as a research assistant for one of my economics professors. The research position was particularly exciting because it involved analyzing regional real estate markets, which had given me extensive knowledge about property values, foreclosure processes, and local economic trends. I was even considering writing my senior thesis on predatory lending practices and their impact on working-class families. My relationship with my family had been stable, if not particularly close. I called home once a week, visited during major holidays, and maintained polite but distant relationships with my parents and Vanessa. I had learned over the years that the less I shared about my successes, the less opportunity there was for family drama. Vanessa, meanwhile, had continued her pattern of starting things and not finishing them. She had dropped out of community college after one semester, claiming the professors didn't understand her learning style. She had been through at least 6 different jobs in the past 4 years, always quitting or getting fired due to some injustice that was never her fault. She was currently living in our parents' basement, ostensibly while she figured out her next move, which seemed to involve a lot of sleeping until noon and complaining about how unfair life was. But none of that was my problem. I had learned to focus on my own goals and not get drawn into Vanessa's perpetual drama. I was 3 months away from graduation, had a job lined up, and felt like I was finally becoming the independent, successful person I had always wanted to be. The college fund was the foundation of all of that. It wasn't just money. It was proof that someone had believed in me enough to invest in my future. It was security, stability, and the promise that I wouldn't have to start my adult life drowning in debt. When I discovered that foundation had been ripped out from under me, it wasn't just a financial catastrophe. It was a complete betrayal of everything I thought I knew about my family and my place in it. But what my parents and Vanessa didn't realize was that those 4 years of studying finance and business hadn't just given me a degree. They had given me tools that I was about to use in ways they never saw coming. That Friday night in my parents' living room, staring at the 3 people who had just destroyed my future, I made a decision that would haunt me for months afterward. Instead of walking out, instead of demanding immediate action, instead of calling a lawyer right then and there, I chose to believe them. "She's going to pay it back," my father had said, and I wanted so desperately for that to be true that I convinced myself it was possible. "How long?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. 6 months, Vanessa said confidently. "I've got some really promising job interviews lined up, and once I get back on my feet, I'll start making payments immediately." "What about spring semester?" I asked. "I need $8,000 for tuition and living expenses in January. That's less than 2 months away." My parents exchanged another one of those looks. "We can cover spring semester," my mother said slowly. "We'll take out a loan against the house if we have to. You're so close to graduating, we can't let this derail your education." Looking back, I should have known that was a lie. "Okay," I said finally. "But I need this in writing, all of it. The repayment plan, the timeline, everything." "Natalie, come on," Vanessa said with an eye roll. "We're family." "Do you really need contracts and paperwork for everything?" "Yes," I said firmly. "Aunt Cordelia left that money specifically for my education. If you're borrowing it, I need documentation." My father nodded. "That's fair. We'll draw up an agreement." Over the next hour, we hammered out what I thought was a reasonable repayment plan. Vanessa would pay back the full $42,000 over 18 months, starting in March after she found a new job. My parents would cover my spring semester expenses, and any interest or fees they incurred from borrowing that money would be Vanessa's responsibility to repay as well. I insisted on including specific penalties for late payments and a clause that if Vanessa defaulted on the agreement, my parents would be legally responsible for the full amount. At the time, I thought I was being thorough and protecting myself. I had no idea I was documenting what would later become evidence of fraud. Vanessa signed the agreement with a flourish, as if she was signing an autograph. "There," she said. "Happy now?" I wasn't happy, but I was hopeful. Maybe this crisis would be the wake-up call Vanessa needed to finally get her life together. Maybe being forced to repay such a large amount would teach her the value of money and responsibility. Maybe this would actually be good for our relationship in the long run. That was my first mistake, believing that people who had shown me exactly who they were would somehow magically become different. I drove back to Riverside that Sunday evening with a copy of the signed agreement in my backpack and a mixture of anxiety and optimism in my chest. I had less than 2 months to figure out how to finish my degree, but my parents had promised to cover spring semester, and Vanessa had committed to starting repayments in March. It wasn't ideal, but it was manageable. Bitoy. The next few weeks, I threw myself into finding solutions. I applied for emergency student aid, researched scholarship opportunities for graduating seniors, and even looked into the possibility of deferring graduation by a semester to give myself more time to secure funding. I met with my academic advisor, Professor Catherine Morrison, to explain my situation. "Natalie, I'm so sorry to hear about this," she said, reviewing my financial aid options. "But you're one of our strongest students. Have you considered applying for our graduate teaching assistantship program? It would cover your tuition for a master's degree and provide a small stipend." It wasn't what I had planned, but it was a potential lifeline. I filled out the application that same day. Meanwhile, I had to figure out how to survive financially until my parents came through with the promised spring semester funding. I picked up extra tutoring hours, started selling my textbooks and anything else I could spare, and moved to an even cheaper off-campus apartment with 3 roommates. I was eating peanut butter sandwiches for most meals and walking everywhere to save on gas money. Lemons. But I told myself it was temporary. My parents would come through with the tuition money in January, Vanessa would start paying me back in March, and by the following fall, I'd either have my master's program funded or I'd be starting my career at Sterling Financial with a steady paycheck. The first sign that things weren't going according to plan came in mid-December. I called home to check on the status of the spring semester funding. "Oh, honey," my mother said, her voice strained, "we're still working on that. The loan application is taking longer than expected." "What do you mean, longer than expected?" "Well, with your father's credit score and our debt-to-income ratio, the bank is requiring additional documentation. But don't worry, we'll figure something out." I felt the familiar. That was the moment I should have realized they were lying to me. My parents had been handling financial matters for decades. They knew exactly what their credit situation was and what they could and couldn't qualify for. But I was so desperate to believe that everything would work out that I convinced myself they were just being overly cautious. I spent my winter break at home, ostensibly to save money on rent, but really to monitor the situation more closely. Vanessa was still living in the basement, still sleeping until noon, and showed no signs of the intense job search she had promised. When I asked her about her interviews, she always had an excuse. The marketing position didn't work out. They wanted someone with more experience. But I have another interview next week. The retail management job was beneath my skill set. I'm holding out for something better. The office job had weird hours. I need something more flexible. Each excuse was plausible on its own, but together they painted a picture of someone who wasn't seriously looking for work. Still, I bit my tongue. The last thing I wanted was to create more family drama when I needed their cooperation to finish school. Christmas that year was awkward and tense. Vanessa had somehow managed to buy expensive gifts for everyone: designer perfume for my mother, a high-end watch for my father, and a $200 gift card to my favorite bookstore for me. When I asked how she had afforded such generous gifts, she said she had saved up from her last job. I opened my gift card with a sick feeling in my stomach, wondering if this was my own money being used to buy my Christmas present. The breaking point came on January 3rd, 1 week before spring semester started. I called my parents to get a final update on the tuition situation. "Natalie, we need to talk," my father said. "The loan didn't come through." "What do you mean it didn't come through?" "We were denied. Our debt-to-income ratio is too high, and we don't have enough equity in the house to qualify for a home equity loan." I sat down hard on my dorm room bed. "But you promised. You said you would cover spring semester." "We tried, honey. We really did. But maybe this is a sign that you should take a semester off, get a full-time job, and save up money to finish school later." Take a semester off. After working so hard for 3.5 years, after being 3 months away from graduation, after already having a job offer contingent on completing my degree, take a semester off so that Vanessa could continue living rent-free in their basement while driving around in a BMW bought with my inheritance money. "What about Vanessa's repayment plan?" I asked. "She was supposed to start paying me back in March." There was a long pause. "Well, she hasn't found a job yet, so we might need to adjust that timeline." "Adjust it how?" "Maybe give her a little more time. The job market is tough right now." That was when I realized that my parents had never intended to hold Vanessa accountable for anything. They had signed that agreement to placate me, but they had no intention of enforcing it. They were hoping I would just accept the loss and move on, the way I had accepted being overlooked and undervalued my entire life. But this time was different. This time, they hadn't just hurt my feelings or disappointed me. This time, they had stolen my future and given it to someone who had done nothing to earn it. That night, I made 2 phone calls that would change everything. The first was to Professor Morrison, to accept the graduate teaching assistantship that would allow me to finish my bachelor's degree and continue with a master's program. The second was to a student legal aid clinic to ask about my options for recovering the stolen inheritance money. At Bacos, I wasn't going to take a semester off. I wasn't going to let Vanessa's irresponsibility derail my education. And I definitely wasn't going to let my parents get away with choosing their golden child over their daughter who had actually earned their support. But what I didn't know yet was that this betrayal was just the beginning. My family was about to show me exactly how far they were willing to go to protect Vanessa from the consequences of her actions, and I was about to discover that I was stronger and more ruthless than any of them had ever imagined. The legal aid clinic had been helpful but cautious. The student attorney, a third-year law student named James Chen, had reviewed my repayment agreement with Vanessa and confirmed that it was legally binding. However, he warned me that collecting on family debts was notoriously difficult, especially when the debtor had no assets or income. Your best bet is to wait until March when the payments are supposed to start, he had advised. If she defaults immediately, you'll have stronger grounds for legal action. Document everything, keep all communications in writing, and don't let them manipulate you into changing the terms. I followed his advice religiously. Every phone call home was followed up with an email summarizing what was discussed. Every promise was documented. Every excuse was recorded with dates and details. But what I started noticing in those first few weeks of spring semester wasn't what my family was saying. It was what they weren't saying, and more importantly, what they were showing me through social media. The first red flag appeared on Vanessa's Instagram in late January. She had posted a series of photos from what appeared to be a spa weekend at a luxury resort about 2 hours from Willowbrook. The images showed her getting massages, lounging by an indoor pool, and enjoying what looked like very expensive meals. The caption read, "Sometimes you just need to treat yourself. Hashtag self-care, hashtag blessed, hashtag living my best life." I stared at those photos for a long time, trying to calculate how much a weekend like that would cost. The resort she was at charged $300 per night minimum, and the spa services she was showing off would easily add another $400 to the bill. That was $700 for a single weekend, money that could have gone toward her first payment to me, which was supposed to start in 6 weeks. When I called home the next Sunday for our weekly check-in, I casually mentioned seeing her posts. "Oh, that," my mother said dismissively. "Rebecca invited her on that trip. Vanessa didn't pay for anything herself." Rebecca was Vanessa's best friend from high school, who had married a successful contractor and lived what appeared to be a very comfortable suburban life. It was plausible that Rebecca had paid for the trip, but something about my mother's quick explanation felt rehearsed. "That's nice of Rebecca," I said carefully. "How's the job search going?" "Really well, actually. Vanessa has several promising leads. She should hear back from a few places this week." The same thing she had been saying for months. 2 weeks later, Vanessa posted photos of herself at an expensive steakhouse in the city, celebrating what she called good news. The dinner looked elaborate. Multiple courses, wine, the kind of meal that would cost $150 per person minimum. When I asked my mother about it during our next call, she said Vanessa had gotten a job offer and was celebrating with friends. "That's wonderful," I said, feeling genuinely relieved. "What's the job?" "It's a marketing position with a small firm downtown. She starts Monday." "What company?" There was a slight pause. "I don't remember the exact name. Something with creative in the title, I think." That was the second red flag. My mother had an excellent memory for details, especially when it came to Vanessa's life. She could usually tell me exactly what Vanessa had for breakfast, let alone the name of the company where she had just gotten her first real job in years. I decided to do a little investigating. I searched LinkedIn for marketing firms in our area with creative in the name and found 3 possibilities. I called all 3, claiming to be verifying employment for a background check, and none of— What's the address? I'd like to send her a congratulations card. I don't have that information with me right now. I'll have to ask her and get back to you. She never got back to me. Meanwhile, Vanessa's social media activity continued to show a lifestyle that was inconsistent with someone who had just started an entry-level marketing job. Designer coffee every morning from the most expensive cafe in Willowbrook. Lunch at trendy restaurants with $20 salads. Shopping trips that resulted in new clothes from stores I couldn't afford to shop at even with my teaching assistantship. The most damning evidence came in early March, right around the time when Vanessa's first payment to me was supposed to start. She posted a photo of herself getting her nails done at an upscale salon, with a caption about, "Treating yourself because you deserve it." I recognized the salon. It was the same one where my roommate had gotten her nails done for a wedding, and she had mentioned it cost $80 for a basic manicure. $80 for a manicure when she owed me her first payment of $2,333. I screenshot every single post, every single expense, every single indication that my sister was living well beyond the means of someone who was supposed to be starting over financially. I created a spreadsheet tracking her documented spending against the timeline of her supposed job search and eventual employment. By mid-March, when I still hadn't received her first payment, I had documented over $2,000 in discretionary spending just from what she had posted publicly. The real number was almost certainly much higher. When I called to ask about the missing payment, Vanessa herself answered the phone for the first time in months. "Oh, hey, Nat," she said, sounding distracted. "What's up?" "It's March 15th, I said. "According to our agreement, I should have received your first payment 2 weeks ago." "Yeah, about that. I'm gonna need a little more time to get caught up. Starting a new job is expensive, you know. I had to buy work clothes, and there are all these training costs they don't tell you about up front." "What training costs?" "Just, professional development stuff. Look, I'll get you the money as soon as I can, okay? But you need to be patient with me. I'm doing my best here." "Vanessa, where do you work?" "What do you mean? What's the name of your company? What's your job title? Where is your office located?" There was a long pause. "Why are you interrogating me like this?" "I told you I got a job." "Because I've called every marketing firm in the area with creative in the name, and none of them have heard of you." Another pause, longer this time. "You called my potential employers? Natalie, that's insane. You could have gotten me fired before I even started." "So you do have a job?" "Of course I have a job. God, you're so paranoid. Just because you can't find the company online doesn't mean it doesn't exist. It's a small startup. They're not on LinkedIn yet. What's the company's name?" That night, I spent 3 hours searching for any business entity called Creative Solutions Marketing in our state. I checked business registrations, Better Business Bureau listings, Google reviews, everything I could think of. The company didn't exist. Vanessa had lied about having a job, which meant she had been lying about her ability to pay me back, which meant my parents had been covering for her lies for months. But the most disturbing realization came when I started thinking about the timeline. Vanessa's expensive lifestyle hadn't started after she supposedly got this mysterious job. It had been consistent throughout the winter, even during the months when she claimed to be desperately searching for work, which meant that somehow she had access to money the entire time. Enough money to maintain a lifestyle that included spa weekends, expensive dinners, designer purchases, and weekly salon visits. Where was that money coming from? I had a horrible suspicion that I already knew the answer, but I needed proof before I could act on it. The next morning, I called the bank that held Aunt Cordelia's trust account and requested a complete transaction history for the past year. As the intended beneficiary of the trust, I had the right to review how the money had been spent. What I discovered when those records arrived 3 days later would make me question everything I thought I knew about my family's morality and my own judgment in trusting them. The truth was so much worse than I had imagined. The bank records arrived on a Friday afternoon in a thick manila envelope marked "Confidential." I waited until I was alone in my apartment to open them, somehow knowing that what I was about to discover would change everything. The transaction history for Aunt Cordelia's trust account was 12 pages long, dating back to when the account was first established after her death. For the first 2.5 years, the pattern was exactly what I expected. Quarterly transfers to my checking account for tuition and approved expenses, always with my parents' electronic authorization and my submitted receipts. But starting in October, 2 months before they claimed Vanessa needed the money for her crisis, the pattern changed dramatically. The first irregular transaction was a $3,000 withdrawal on October 15th, authorized by my father with a notation that read, "Educational expenses, books and equipment." But I had already purchased all my books for fall semester, and I had receipts proving I had spent less than $400 on course materials. 3 days later, there was a $2,500 withdrawal marked "Educational expenses, living costs." Again, this made no sense. I had been living on my teaching assistant stipend and my part-time tutoring income. I hadn't requested any additional living expense money from the trust. October showed 4 unauthorized withdrawals totaling $8,200. November had 6 withdrawals totaling $11,400. December, the month they finally told me about Vanessa's supposed crisis, showed 8 withdrawals totaling $13,600. By the time they officially loaned the money to Vanessa in late December, there was only $8,800 left in an account that should have had $42,000. They had been systematically draining my inheritance for months before they ever told me Vanessa needed help. But the most damning evidence was in the memo lines of the transactions. My father had been required to provide justification for each withdrawal, and his explanations became increasingly creative as the amounts grew larger. Educational expenses, computer equipment, minus $4,500. I had bought a used laptop for $300 2 years earlier. Educational expenses, research materials, minus $3,200. My research was... I sat on my apartment floor surrounded by bank statements, feeling like I was going to be sick. This wasn't a family crisis that had spiraled out of control. This was premeditated theft that had been going on for months. My parents had been stealing from me systematically while looking me in the eye every Sunday and asking how school was going. But I needed to understand the full scope of what they had done. I pulled out my laptop and started cross-referencing the withdrawal dates with Vanessa's social media posts. October 15th minus $3,000 withdrawal. October 16th, Vanessa posted photos from a weekend shopping trip to the premium outlets, showing off bags from Coach, Michael Kors, and Nordstrom. October 18th minus $2,500 withdrawal. October 20th, Vanessa posted photos of herself at a high-end hair salon, getting highlights and extensions that would have cost at least $400. November 3rd minus $4,200 withdrawal. November 4th, Vanessa posted about treating herself to a spa day at the resort where she would later take her mysterious weekend trip. The pattern was undeniable. Every withdrawal from my trust account was followed within 24 to 48 hours by evidence of Vanessa's increased spending. They hadn't waited until December to give her my money. They had been funneling it to her steadily for months, while telling me she was struggling to find work and desperately needed help. The European vacation photos I had seen on her Instagram weren't from money she stole in December. She had been planning and paying for that trip since October, using my inheritance money that my parents had been secretly transferring to her. I printed out every bank statement and every relevant social media post. organizing them chronologically to build a timeline of the theft. Then I did something I probably should have done months earlier. I drove home to Willowbrook unannounced. It was 7 p.m. on a Friday when I pulled into my parents' driveway. Through the kitchen window, I could see my family sitting around the dinner table, my parents, Vanessa, and a man I didn't recognize. They were laughing about something, and there was a bottle of wine open on the table. It looked like a celebration. I knocked on the front door and watched my father's face change when he saw me through the window. He said something to the others, and by the time he opened the door, the atmosphere had shifted to something tense and guarded. "Natalie, what are you doing here? We weren't expecting you." "I need to talk to you and Mom about the trust account," I said, holding up the manila envelope. "All of us. Right now." My mother appeared behind him, looking nervous. "Honey, this isn't really a good time. We have company." "I don't care about your company. We need to discuss the fact that you've been stealing from me for months." The man at the dinner table, who I now realized was probably Vanessa's mysterious boyfriend, stood up and announced that he should probably leave. Vanessa walked him to the door with an apologetic smile, whispering something in his ear that made him glance back at me with what looked like pity. Once we were alone, I spread the bank statements across their dining room table like evidence in a courtroom. "October through December," I said, my voice surprisingly steady despite the rage I felt. 33 unauthorized withdrawals totaling $33,200 from my trust account, every single one justified with lies about my educational expenses. Every single one followed by evidence of Vanessa's increased spending. My parents stared at the papers as if they were written in a foreign language. "Natalie, you don't understand," my mother began. "We were trying to help your sister through a difficult time," my father said defensively. "We always intended to pay you back." "With what money? You can't even qualify for a loan to cover one semester of my tuition. But you thought you could pay back $33,000? Vanessa, who had been suspiciously quiet during this confrontation, finally spoke up. "Natalie, you're being really dramatic about this. It's not like you needed the money immediately. You had your teaching thing figured out." "My teaching thing?" I stared at her in disbelief. "I'm working 60 hours a week and living on ramen noodles because you stole my inheritance. I had to give up my original career plans and commit to 2 more years of graduate school just to survive financially." "Well, maybe that's better for you anyway," she said with a shrug. "More education is never a bad thing." The casual dismissal of how her theft had upended my entire life was like a slap in the face. But what came next was worse. "Besides," Vanessa continued, "Aunt Cordelia was always kind of weird about money. She probably would have wanted us to use it for whatever the family needed, not just hoard it for one person's college expenses. She left that money specifically for my education," I said through gritted teeth. "Her will was very clear about that." "Wills can be interpreted different ways," my mother said quietly. That was when I realized they had convinced themselves that what they were doing was somehow justified. They had rewritten the narrative in their minds to make me the selfish one for wanting to use my own inheritance for its intended purpose. "Where's the rest of it?" I asked. "There should still be about $8,800 left in the account." Another exchange of glances between my parents. "We had to use that for Vanessa's security deposit," my father said. "She's moving into her own apartment next month." "What apartment?" "A really nice 1-bedroom in Riverside Commons," Vanessa said proudly. "It's got a fitness center and a pool." The security deposit was $3,500 plus first month's rent. Riverside Commons was one of the most expensive apartment complexes in the area. I knew because I had looked at it when I was apartment hunting and couldn't afford even their cheapest units. "So there's nothing left," I said. "You've stolen my entire inheritance." "We haven't stolen anything," my mother said, her voice rising. "This is family money, and we used it to help a family member who needed it. You're acting like money is more important than your sister's well-being. You're right, I said, gathering up the bank statements. Money isn't more important than family. But you stopped being my family the moment you decided to steal from me and lie to my face about it for months. I walked toward the door, then turned back for one final statement. You have 48 hours to transfer every penny you stole back into my account. If you don't, I'm filing criminal charges for theft and fraud. Against all of you. As I drove back to Riverside that night, I felt something I had never experienced before in my relationship with my family. Complete clarity. They had shown me exactly who they were and exactly how much my well-being mattered to them. Now it was time to show them exactly who I was and what I was capable of when someone tried to destroy me. But what I discovered during those 48 hours of silence would prove that my family's betrayal went far deeper than simple theft. They hadn't just stolen my inheritance, they had been planning to ensure I never found out about it. On Sunday evening, exactly 48 hours after my confrontation, I was preparing to contact the police when my phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. Natalie, this is Derek Walsh from First National Bank. I was Aunt Cordelia's personal banker. We need to talk. Meet me at Brewster's Coffee on Main Street tomorrow at 10 a.m. Come alone and don't tell your parents about this message. I stared at the text for several minutes, my heart racing. How did Derek Walsh get my number? Why was Aunt Cordelia's banker contacting me now? And why the secrecy? I barely slept that night, cycling through dozens of possible explanations. Maybe there had been additional accounts I didn't know about. Maybe there was some legal issue with the trust that Derek needed to discuss. Maybe my parents had contacted the bank trying to cover their tracks. I arrived at Brewster's Coffee 10 minutes early, choosing a corner table where I could see the entire cafe. Derek Walsh turned out to be a man in his late 50s, with graying hair and kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. He spotted me immediately. Apparently, I looked exactly like Aunt Cordelia had described. "Natalie," he said, sitting down across from me with a grim expression. "Thank you for coming. I wasn't sure if you'd respond to a text from a stranger, but I couldn't risk calling your parents' house." "Why not?" Derek pulled out a manila folder and set it on the table between us. "Because your parents have been lying to you about more than just the trust account. They've been lying to me too, and I think they've been planning this theft for a lot longer than you realize." My stomach dropped. "What do you mean?" 3 months ago, your father came to see me. He said you were having academic problems and might not graduate on time. He said you were struggling with depression and had been making poor financial decisions with your trust money. He wanted to know what options existed for protecting your inheritance until you were more mature. I felt like the air had been sucked out of my lungs. Academic problems? Poor financial decisions? I have a 3.8 GPA, and I've never spent a penny of that money on anything but approved educational expenses. "I know that now," Derek said grimly. "But at the time, your father was very convincing. He showed me what appeared to be academic records showing failing grades. He had documentation of large, unexplained purchases allegedly made with trust funds. He even had what looked like emails from you asking for money for non-educational expenses. Those were forgeries? Elaborate ones, professional quality. Your father told me he was concerned that if you had unrestricted access to the remaining trust funds, you might waste the money on drugs or alcohol. He wanted to know if there was a way to temporarily suspend your access while you got help." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "And you believed him?" Derek looked ashamed. "Your father was very persuasive, and he had documentation. Plus, families dealing with young adults who have substance abuse or mental health issues come to me for this kind of advice more often than you'd think." I gave him information about how trust funds can be temporarily frozen for the beneficiary's protection. The pieces were starting to fall into place, and the picture they formed was terrifying. They weren't just stealing from me. They were building a case to prevent me from ever getting control of my own money. That's what I'm afraid of, Derek said. And there's more. 2 weeks ago, your father called me asking about the process for declaring someone mentally incompetent to manage their finances. He said your behavior had become increasingly erratic and that you had been making threats against family members. I stared at him in horror. Threats? What kind of threats? He claimed you had threatened to hurt your sister if she didn't pay back money you believed she owed you. He said you had been calling family members and making wild accusations about theft and fraud. He wanted to know what kind of medical documentation would be needed to have your financial decision-making rights transferred to a guardian. My hands were shaking. They were planning to have me declared incompetent. I think so, yes. And, Natalie, I have to tell you, if they had brought me convincing medical documentation and testimony from family members, it might have worked. These cases are more common than people realize, and the legal bar for financial incompetency isn't as high as you might think. Derek opened the folder and pulled out a stack of papers. This is everything your father gave me over the past 3 months. The forged academic records, the fake financial statements, the supposed emails from you. I kept copies because something felt wrong about the whole situation. I looked through the documents with growing amazement at their sophistication. The academic records looked exactly like official transcripts from Riverside University, complete with the correct logos and formatting. The financial statements showed large withdrawals for cash, casino visits, and online gambling sites. The emails were written in a voice that sounded like mine, but the content was completely fabricated. How did they create these? I think your sister might have more skills than you realize, Derek said. The technical quality of these forgeries suggests someone with graphic design experience and access to professional software. That was when I remembered something that made my blood run cold. Vanessa had spent 2 years in community college studying digital media and graphic design before she dropped out. She had always been good with computers and had bragged about being able to make any document look official during her brief stint working at a copy shop. There's something else, Derek continued. Your father asked me not to communicate directly with you about any trust matters. He said that given your mental state, financial discussions might trigger episodes of erratic behavior. He requested that all communication go through him as the trustee. So when I called last week asking for the transaction history, I almost didn't send it to you. Your father had specifically told me not to provide you with any account information without his approval. But something about his story had been bothering me, and when I heard your voice on the phone, you sounded completely rational and coherent. Nothing like the troubled young woman he had described. I felt a surge of gratitude toward this stranger who had trusted his instincts over my father's lies. Thank you for sending those records. Without them, I never would have discovered what they were doing. Natalie, there's one more thing you need to know. Your father asked me about the process for having trust funds transferred to a different beneficiary in cases of incompetency. He wanted to know if, hypothetically, your sister could become the beneficiary if you were declared unable to manage finances responsibly. The full scope of their plan hit me like a physical blow. They weren't just stealing my inheritance, they were planning to steal my entire future. If they had succeeded in having me declared incompetent, Vanessa would have gotten legal control of whatever money was left, and I would have been left with nothing and no legal recourse. How close were they to succeeding? Derek's expression was grave. Closer than I'm comfortable admitting, and that guardian would have been, most likely, your parents, with your sister as a backup. Your father specifically asked about that scenario. I sat back in my chair, overwhelmed by the magnitude of what my family had been planning. This wasn't just theft. It was an elaborate conspiracy to destroy my financial independence permanently. They had been systematically building a case to have me declared mentally incompetent so they could legally steal everything Aunt Cordelia had left me. Derek, I need to ask you something important. Would you be willing to testify about all of this if I press criminal charges? Absolutely, he said without hesitation. What your family has done isn't just morally wrong, It's criminal fraud on multiple levels. The forged documents alone are felonies. Add in the theft, the conspiracy, and the attempted guardianship fraud, and they're looking at serious prison time. What should I do next? Derek pulled out a business card and handed it to me. This is the contact information for Detective Lisa Rodriguez with the Financial Crimes Unit. I've already spoken with her about this situation. She's expecting your call. As I walked out of Brewster's Coffee that morning, I realized that my family hadn't just stolen my money. They had tried to steal my entire identity as a competent adult. They had been planning to have me declared mentally incompetent and permanently dependent on their control. But they had made one crucial mistake. They had underestimated me. They thought I was the same naive, trusting daughter who would accept their explanations and move on with my life. They thought I would never investigate, never question, never fight back. They were about to discover exactly how wrong they were. That afternoon, I called Detective Rodriguez and scheduled a meeting for the following day. But first, I had one more investigation to conduct. If my family was capable of this level of deception and planning, I needed to know what other secrets they might be hiding. Because something told me that the theft of my inheritance was just the beginning of what I was going to discover about the people I had once called family. My meeting with Detective Rodriguez was scheduled for Tuesday afternoon, but Monday evening brought an unexpected development that revealed just how desperate my family was becoming. I was in my apartment reviewing the evidence I had gathered when my phone rang. It was my mother, and for the first time in months, she sounded genuinely distraught. "Natalie, honey, we need to talk," she said, her voice thick with tears. "There's been a terrible misunderstanding, and I think we can work this out as a family without involving lawyers or police." "There's no misunderstanding, Mom. You stole my inheritance and tried to have me declared mentally incompetent." "Who told you that?" Her voice sharpened instantly, the tears disappearing. "Have you been talking to people about private family matters?" The speed with which she shifted from emotional manipulation to interrogation told me everything I needed to know about how calculated this call was. "It doesn't matter who I've been talking to. What matters is that I have documentation of everything you've done." "Natalie, listen to me very carefully," my mother said, her tone becoming urgent. "You're making a terrible mistake. If you go to the police with these accusations, you're going to destroy this family. Is that really what you want? To tear apart the only support system you have over money? You already destroyed this family when you decided to steal from me." "We didn't steal anything. We used family money to help a family member in crisis." The erratic phone calls, the paranoid accusations, the way you've been obsessing over money and making wild claims about conspiracies. "Natalie, we've been trying to protect you, but if this goes to court, we'll have to share our concerns about your mental state with the authorities." I felt a chill run down my spine. They were going to use their attempted incompetency fraud as a defense against the theft charges. They were going to claim that my accusations were proof of the mental instability they had been documenting. "You mean the mental instability you fabricated with forged documents?" There was a long pause. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Derek Walsh told me everything, Mom. The fake academic records, the forged financial statements, the emails you and Dad created to make it look like I was gambling and making poor decisions. I have copies of everything." Another pause, longer this time. When my mother spoke again, her voice had changed completely. Gone was the emotional manipulation and the false concern. What remained was cold and calculating. Quote, "Derek Walsh had no right to share confidential banking information with you. What he did was probably illegal, and anything he told you is inadmissible in court. Are you threatening to sue the banker who exposed your fraud? I'm telling you that if you continue down this path, you're going to face consequences you haven't considered. Do you really think a bank is going to hire someone who's been involved in a messy legal battle with their own family? Do you think Sterling Financial is going to want an employee who drags them into criminal proceedings? My heart stopped. How did she know about my job offer from Sterling Financial? I had never mentioned it to anyone in my family. How do you know about Sterling Financial? We know a lot of things about your life, Natalie. More than you realize. And if you force us to defend ourselves in court, we'll use every piece of information we have. The implication was clear. They had been investigating me just as thoroughly as I had been investigating them. But how? And what information could they possibly have that would be damaging? Bae, what are you talking about? Did you really think we didn't know about your relationship with Professor Morrison? About the special favors that helped you get that teaching assistantship? About the academic misconduct allegations that were quietly swept under the rug? I felt like I had been punched in the stomach. There was no relationship with Professor Morrison beyond professional mentorship, no special favors, and definitely no academic misconduct. But the fact that my mother was making these accusations with such confidence meant they had fabricated evidence for these claims too. None of that is true, and you know it. Do I? Or are you so delusional that you've convinced yourself your success is entirely legitimate? Natalie, we have documentation of inappropriate communications between you and your professor. We have evidence of grade changes that benefited you unfairly. We have witness statements from other students who were concerned about the special treatment you received. More forgeries. More fabricated evidence. They had been building a case not just to steal my inheritance, but to destroy my entire academic and professional reputation if I tried to fight back. You're lying. We're protecting ourselves. And if you insist on involving the authorities, we'll be forced to share our concerns about your mental state and your academic integrity with everyone who matters to your future. Your professors, your graduate program administrators, your potential employers. Is pursuing this really worth destroying your entire career before it starts? I was quiet for a long time. There's another option, my mother continued, her voice becoming gentle again. We can forget this whole unpleasant misunderstanding ever happened. Vanessa will start paying you back gradually, maybe $50 a month until the debt is settled. You can finish your graduate program without any distractions, start your career at Sterling Financial, and build the successful life you've always wanted. All you have to do is stop making these accusations and trust that your family wants what's best for you. $50 a month. At that rate, it would take me over 80 years to recover my inheritance. And if I don't accept this generous offer, then we'll be forced to defend ourselves by sharing everything we know about your recent behavior and academic misconduct. The choice is yours, Natalie. You can have a successful future, or you can have a legal battle that will destroy your reputation permanently. But you can't have both. After she hung up, I sat in my apartment feeling more shaken than I had since this whole nightmare began. My family hadn't just stolen from me. They had been preparing for the possibility that I would fight back, and they had created weapons to destroy me if I did. The academic misconduct allegations were particularly devastating because they attacked the one thing I was most proud of, my academic integrity. Even if the charges were ultimately proven false, the mere accusation could derail my graduate program and torpedo my job offer. Universities and employers were notoriously risk-averse when it came to any hint of academic dishonesty. But as I sat there contemplating the ruins of my future, something Derek Walsh had said came back to me. The technical quality of these forgeries suggests someone with graphic design experience and access to professional software. If Vanessa had created forged academic records and financial statements, she had almost certainly created forged evidence of academic misconduct as well. And if she had done that, she had made a crucial mistake. I pulled out my laptop and began researching digital forensics and document authentication. If Vanessa had created these forgeries electronically, there would be digital fingerprints, metadata, font inconsistencies, layer information that could prove the documents were fake. More importantly, I realized that my family's escalating threats were actually evidence of their desperation. If they really had solid evidence of academic misconduct, They would have used it months ago when they first started planning to have me declared incompetent. The fact that they were only threatening to use it now as a defensive measure against my theft allegations suggested that they knew their position was weak. They were trying to scare me into backing down because they were afraid of what would happen if this went to court. That night, I made 2 important phone calls. The first was to Professor Morrison, who was both shocked and outraged to learn that someone had been forging documents to suggest an inappropriate relationship between us. "Natalie, this is incredibly serious," she said. "Not just the forgery, but the potential damage to both our reputations. I want you to know that I'll provide whatever testimony you need to prove these allegations are false, and I'm going to report this to the university's legal department immediately." The second call was to James Chen at the Legal Aid Clinic. When I explained what my family was threatening, his response was immediate and decisive. "They're trying to intimidate you into dropping legitimate criminal charges by threatening to file false claims against you. That's called criminal intimidation, and it's a felony. Natalie, you need to report this to Detective Rodriguez immediately. These threats actually strengthen your case. They show consciousness of guilt and willingness to engage in additional criminal behavior." As I prepared for my meeting with Detective Rodriguez the following day, I realized that my family had made a critical error in judgment. They thought they were dealing with the same naive, trusting daughter who had believed their lies for months. They thought they could intimidate me into silence with threats and false accusations. But every threat they made, every lie they told, every piece of forged evidence they created was just more rope for them to hang themselves with. They had started with simple. My meeting with Detective Rodriguez was scheduled for 2 p.m. Tuesday, but at 11 a.m. that morning, I received a call that would reveal the true depths of my family's depravity. The caller ID showed my university's main number, and when I answered, it was Dr. Sarah Chen, the Dean of Student Affairs. "Miss Winters, I need you to come to my office immediately. We've received some very serious allegations about your academic conduct that require immediate investigation." My heart sank. They had actually done it. My family had submitted their forged evidence to the university, trying to destroy my academic standing before I could meet with the police. "What kind of allegations?" "I'd rather discuss this in person. How quickly can you get here?" An hour later, I sat in Dean Chen's office, staring at a thick folder of documents that represented months of my family's planning. The forgeries were even more sophisticated than I had imagined. They had created fake email exchanges between me and Professor Morrison that suggested an inappropriate relationship. They had fabricated evidence of grade changes in my favor. Most damaging of all, they had created false documentation suggesting I had plagiarized portions of my senior thesis. "These allegations were submitted by your father," Dean Chen explained. "He contacted us this morning claiming he had discovered evidence of academic misconduct and felt obligated to report it despite the personal cost to his family." "Dean Chen, none of this is true. These documents are forgeries created by my family to intimidate me into dropping criminal charges against them for theft." She looked at me with what appeared to be genuine sympathy. "Miss Winters, these are very serious accusations you're making about your own family. Are you saying your father deliberately fabricated evidence to damage your academic standing?" "That's exactly what I'm saying, and I can prove it." I pulled out my phone and called Derek Walsh, putting him on speaker with Dean Chen's permission. Derek confirmed the timeline of my father's meetings with him and his attempts to build a case for having me declared mentally incompetent. He also confirmed that my father had specifically asked about transferring trust beneficiaries and had mentioned concerns about my academic performance months before any problems actually existed. "Dean Chen," Derek said through the phone, "Mr. Winters showed me academic records claiming his daughter was failing multiple classes. When I saw Miss Winters' actual transcript last week, she has a 3.8 GPA. The documents he showed me were clearly fabricated." After Derek hung up, Dean Chen leaned back in her chair and studied me carefully. "Miss Winters, If what you're saying is true, this represents one of the most elaborate cases of academic fraud we've ever encountered. But you understand that we have to investigate these allegations thoroughly, regardless of their source. I understand. But I need you to know that my family is currently under investigation for stealing my inheritance, and these academic misconduct allegations are their attempt to discredit me before I can testify against them. That's a very serious claim. Do you have any evidence of this theft? I pulled out copies of the bank statements and the timeline I had created matching withdrawals to Vanessa's social media posts. Dean Chen studied the documents with growing amazement. "This is extraordinary," she said finally. "If these bank records are authentic, they show systematic theft over several months. And you're saying the same people who committed this theft are now trying to destroy your academic reputation?" "Yes. And Dean Chen, there's something else you need to know. My family threatened to submit these false allegations if I didn't drop the criminal charges. That conversation was recorded." "Miss Winters," Dean Chen said after the recording ended, "what your family has done isn't just theft and fraud. It's an attack on the integrity of this institution. We take academic misconduct allegations very seriously, but we take false academic misconduct allegations even more seriously." "What happens now?" "First, we're going to conduct a full investigation into these documents. Our IT department has forensic capabilities that can determine if digital documents have been forged. Second, I'm going to contact the police myself to report that your family has attempted to use our institution as a weapon in their campaign of harassment against you." As I left Dean Chen's office, my phone buzzed with a text message from my father. "Hope you're satisfied with the chaos you've created. This is just the beginning." The arrogance of that text message was breathtaking. He had just submitted false evidence to my university in an attempt to destroy my academic career, and he was acting like I was the one causing problems by refusing to accept being robbed. But the real shock came when I arrived at the police station for my 2 p.m. meeting with Detective Rodriguez. As I walked into the building, I saw a familiar figure coming out of the elevator, Vanessa, accompanied by a middle-aged man in an expensive suit who was obviously a lawyer. She saw me at the same moment I saw her, and the look that passed between us was pure hatred. But what she said next, loudly enough for everyone in the lobby to hear, revealed the final card my family was prepared to play. "There she is," Vanessa announced to her lawyer. "My sister who's been stalking and harassing our family for months. I hope you can finally get a restraining order to protect us from her." A restraining order. They were claiming that I was the one harassing them. The lawyer looked at me with undisguised contempt. "Miss Winters, I'm Robert Caldwell, representing the Winters family. I need to inform you that we're filing for protective orders against you based on your pattern of threatening and erratic behavior toward your family members." "Threatening behavior? They stole $42,000 from me. According to my clients, you've been making false accusations about family financial arrangements while struggling with substance abuse and mental health issues. The money in question was used for legitimate family expenses with proper authorization." I stared at Vanessa in disbelief. "Substance abuse? Are you seriously going to claim I'm a drug addict?" "Natalie, we're worried about you," Vanessa said with fake concern. "The paranoid accusations, the obsession with money, the way you've been acting out. We just want you to get the help you need." That was when I realized the full scope of their strategy. They weren't just going to claim I was mentally unstable. They were going to claim I was a dangerous addict who posed a threat to family safety. They were going to paint themselves as the victims of my alleged harassment and use protective orders to prevent me from contacting them or gathering evidence. "Mr. Caldwell," I said to the lawyer, "your clients are under investigation for theft, fraud, and criminal intimidation. Any protective orders they obtain under false pretenses will be additional evidence of their pattern of using the legal system fraudulently. Miss Winters, I'd advise you to stop making defamatory statements about my clients and focus on getting the professional help you clearly need." As Vanessa and her lawyer left the building, she turned back to me with a smile that was pure malice. "Enjoy your meeting with the police, Nat. I'm sure they'll be very interested in hearing about your history of making false accusations when you don't get your way." Detective Rodriguez had been watching this entire exchange from the elevator area, and when I reached her office, her first words were, "Well, that was illuminating. Your family certainly doesn't waste time, do they? You heard all of that?" "Every word." And I spent the next 3 hours with Detective Rodriguez, going through every piece of evidence I had gathered. The bank statements, the social media posts, the forged documents, the recorded threats, the timeline of systematic theft. Everything painted a picture of a family that had committed multiple felonies and was now committing additional felonies to cover up the original crimes. "Miss Winters, I'm going to be honest with you," Detective Rodriguez said as our meeting concluded. "Your family has created a very complex legal situation. They've stolen from you, defrauded a bank, forged documents, attempted to manipulate academic institutions, criminally intimidated you, and now they're filing false police reports and seeking fraudulent protective orders. What does that mean for the case? It means they've committed so many crimes trying to cover up the original theft that they've actually made our job easier. Each false accusation they make, each forged document they create, each threatening phone call they make, is additional evidence of criminal intent and consciousness of guilt. What happens next? We're going to arrest them, all of them. Your parents for theft, fraud, conspiracy, and criminal intimidation. Your sister for conspiracy, receiving stolen property, and whatever her role was in creating the forged documents. They wanted to play hardball? They're about to find out what hardball actually looks like." As I drove home from the police station that evening, I reflected on how completely my family had misjudged the situation. They thought they were dealing with a naive young woman who could be intimidated into silence. Instead, they had found themselves facing someone who understood exactly how the legal and financial systems worked, and who had the documentation to prove every crime they had committed. They had stolen my inheritance, but in trying to cover it up, they had handed me something far more valuable, complete legal and moral justification for destroying them as thoroughly as they had tried to destroy me. The arrests were scheduled for the following morning. By tomorrow night, my parents and sister would be in jail, their reputations would be ruined, and they would be facing decades in prison. But even that wasn't going to be enough. They had tried to steal my future, so I was going to make sure they lost theirs. And I knew exactly how I was going to do it. The arrests happened at 6 a.m. Wednesday morning, executed simultaneously across 3 locations to prevent any of them from warning the others. Detective Rodriguez called me at 6:30 to confirm that my parents had been taken into custody at their home, and Vanessa had been arrested at her expensive new apartment in Riverside Commons, the one she had paid for with the last of my inheritance money. "All 3 are in custody," Detective Rodriguez reported. "We also executed search warrants on their homes and found additional evidence that's going to make this case even stronger." "What kind of evidence?" "Your sister had quite the setup in her apartment. Professional-grade computer equipment, graphic design software, and hard drives containing hundreds of forged documents. Not just the ones targeting you, but academic records, financial statements, and legal documents for other people as well. It looks like she's been running a document forgery business." That revelation didn't surprise me as much as it should have. Vanessa had always been entrepreneurial when it came to finding ways to make money without actually working. Apparently, she had decided to monetize her graphic design skills by helping other people commit fraud. "What about my parents? We found detailed notes in your father's handwriting outlining their entire strategy for having you declared incompetent. Timeline, target dates, the names of lawyers they planned to contact, even a budget for the legal fees. This wasn't a spur. Now we build the strongest possible case for prosecution. But Natalie, I want you to know that your family's lawyer has already been in touch. Robert Caldwell is claiming that his clients are the real victims here, and that you orchestrated this entire situation to frame them for crimes they didn't commit. How could I have orchestrated them stealing money from my own trust account? According to Caldwell, you authorized all the withdrawals yourself, but are now claiming otherwise due to mental health issues. He's saying the family was trying to protect you from your own poor financial decisions. I almost laughed at the absurdity of it. So their defense is that I gave myself $33,000 to fund my sister's luxury lifestyle while I was eating ramen noodles and working 3 jobs? That's apparently what they're going with. Caldwell has also filed a motion requesting psychological evaluation for you, claiming that your accusations are evidence of delusional thinking. Even facing criminal charges, my family was still trying to have me declared mentally incompetent. Their persistence was almost admirable, if it wasn't so sociopathic. But I had been expecting this. During the past week of revelations and betrayals, I had been formulating a plan that went far beyond simply seeing my family prosecuted for their crimes. They had tried to destroy my future, so I was going to make sure they lost theirs, not just through criminal prosecution, but through complete financial ruin. My first call was to a private investigator named Marcus Thompson who specialized in asset recovery and civil fraud cases. When I explained the situation, he was immediately interested. Miss Winters, what your family has done isn't just criminal. It's also grounds for substantial civil damages. We're talking about punitive damages that could reach into the hundreds of thousands of dollars, especially given the elaborate nature of their conspiracy. I want to pursue every possible avenue for financial recovery and damages. Excellent. I'll start by conducting a complete asset investigation on all 3 defendants. Bank accounts, real estate, vehicles, investments, anything that could be seized to satisfy a judgment. I'll also look into whether they have any other victims we don't know about yet. My second call was to a civil attorney recommended by the Legal Aid Clinic, a woman named Patricia Blackwood who had built her reputation on complex family fraud cases. Natalie, she said after reviewing the evidence I had gathered, this is one of the most thoroughly documented fraud cases I've ever seen. Your family didn't just steal from you. They created a paper trail that's going to make them personally liable for far more than just the original theft amount. What do you mean? Under our state's fraud statutes, victims can recover triple damages plus attorney fees for intentional fraud. That means instead of just getting your $42,000 back, you could be awarded $126,000 plus all legal costs. Add in the emotional distress damages from their campaign of harassment and intimidation, and we're looking at a potential civil judgment of $300,000 or more. Do they have that kind of money? That's what we're going to find out. But Natalie, even if they don't have liquid assets, they own real estate. Your parents' house has significant equity, and civil fraud judgments can force the sale of property to satisfy debts. That was exactly what I had been hoping to hear. By Thursday afternoon, Marcus Thompson had completed his preliminary asset investigation, and the results were even better than I had anticipated. Your parents have more assets than they let on, he reported during our meeting. The house is worth approximately $380,000. What about Vanessa? Your sister has been living beyond her means, but she does have some assets. The BMW is worth about $35,000 with $22,000 still owed. She has approximately $15,000 in bank accounts and about $8,000 worth of jewelry and electronics. So if we win a civil judgment, there are actual assets to collect against? Absolutely. And here's the interesting part. I found evidence that your sister has been running that document forgery business for at least 2 years. She's been charging between $500 and $2,000 per forged document. And based on her bank deposits, she's made over $80,000 from this illegal enterprise. Can we seize those earnings? Every penny. Proceeds from criminal activity are subject to both civil forfeiture and restitution orders. Your sister has essentially been running a criminal business using skills she developed while stealing from you. But the most satisfying revelation came when I received a call from Dean Chen at the university. Miss Winters, our forensic analysis of the documents your father submitted has been completed. Not only are they obvious forgeries, but the metadata shows they were created on your sister's computer using software registered in her name. We have absolute proof that your family fabricated evidence to damage your academic reputation. What are the consequences for them? The university is filing its own criminal charges for fraud and false reporting. But more importantly, we're going to make sure that every academic institution in the state knows what they attempted to do. Your family will never be able to use false academic accusations as a weapon against anyone else. That evening, I received an unexpected phone call from Robert Caldwell, my family's lawyer. Miss Winters, I'd like to discuss the possibility of a settlement that could benefit everyone involved. I'm listening. My clients are prepared to admit that mistakes were made in the handling of your trust fund. They're willing to repay the full amount plus interest and formally apologize for any misunderstandings. In exchange for? In exchange for your agreement to drop all criminal charges and civil claims. They're also prepared to pay an additional $25,000 for your pain and suffering. I couldn't help but laugh. Mr. Caldwell, your clients are facing decades in prison and civil judgments that could exceed $300,000. And you're offering me $67,000 to make it all go away? Miss Winters, trials are expensive and uncertain. A settlement guarantees you immediate recovery without the stress and uncertainty of litigation. Here's my counteroffer, Mr. Caldwell. Your clients can plead guilty to all charges, pay full restitution plus $200,000 in damages, and surrender all equity in their house and retirement accounts. In exchange, I won't pursue additional charges for the document forgery business your client has been running. There was a long pause. That's completely unreasonable. What's unreasonable is stealing someone's inheritance and then trying to have them declared mentally incompetent when they fight back. What's unreasonable is submitting forged documents to academic institutions to destroy someone's career. What's unreasonable is threatening to destroy someone's future if they don't accept. This is vindictive. This is justice. Your clients made calculated decisions to commit multiple felonies against their own family member. Now they get to live with the consequences of those decisions. After Caldwell hung up, I felt something I hadn't experienced since this nightmare began: complete control. For months, my family had been dictating the terms of my life, manipulating me, lying to me, and trying to destroy me. Now I was the one with all the power, and they were the ones facing an uncertain and terrifying future. The criminal trial was still months away, but the civil case could proceed immediately. Patricia Blackwood had already filed suit seeking treble damages, attorney fees, and punitive damages for intentional infliction of emotional distress. The asset freeze orders were in place, preventing my family from hiding or disposing of their property before judgment. More importantly, I had discovered something about myself that I never knew existed. When pushed to the breaking point, I wasn't just capable of fighting back. I was capable of winning completely and utterly. My family had taught me that blood relationships meant nothing without respect and love. Now I was going to teach them that actions have consequences, even when the victim is someone you thought would never fight back. Especially when the victim is someone you thought would never fight back. 2 weeks after the arrests, the true scope of Vanessa's document forgery operation became clear when Marcus Thompson's investigation uncovered what Detective Rodriguez called, quote, one of the most sophisticated fraud rings we've seen involving a college student. The evidence found on Vanessa's computers revealed that she hadn't just been forging documents for her own benefit. She had been selling her services to other people looking to commit various types of fraud. The discovery came when forensic analysts found encrypted files containing over 400 forged documents, fake diplomas, altered transcripts, fabricated employment records, false medical documents, and even counterfeit court orders. Vanessa had been charging between $800 and $3,500 per document, depending on complexity, and had earned over $180,000 from her illegal business over the past 3 years. Your sister wasn't just stealing from you, Marcus explained during our meeting. She was using the skills she developed to defraud you as the foundation for a criminal enterprise that victimized dozens of other people. But the most damaging discovery was a detailed client list that included names, contact information, and the specific types of fraud each client was planning to commit. One client had purchased fake medical records to fraudulently claim disability benefits. Another had bought forged employment documentation to obtain a mortgage they couldn't qualify for legitimately. Several college students had purchased altered transcripts to transfer to better schools or qualify for scholarships they hadn't earned. This client list is going to destroy a lot of lives, Detective Rodriguez warned me during our follow-up meeting. The district attorney's office is treating this as a major fraud conspiracy, and they're going to prosecute every single person who purchased forged documents from your sister. The federal authorities were also getting involved. Since Vanessa had mailed forged documents across state lines and used the internet to conduct her business, she was facing federal charges for wire fraud and mail fraud in addition to the state charges for stealing my inheritance. Natalie, Detective Rodriguez continued, I need you to understand that your sister is looking at a minimum of 20 years in federal prison, possibly more. The prosecutors are treating her as the ringleader of a major criminal organization. 20 years. When this whole nightmare started, I had simply wanted my college money back. Now my sister was facing 2 decades behind bars. But I felt no sympathy for her. Every document in that encrypted file represented someone else's life being destroyed by Vanessa's greed and dishonesty. The disabled veteran whose benefits had been delayed because someone else was fraudulently claiming similar benefits. The honest students whose scholarship opportunities had been reduced because fraudulent applications were taking up limited slots. The employers who had hired people based on fake credentials, only to discover they were completely unqualified. Natalie, under federal asset forfeiture laws, all proceeds from your sister's criminal enterprise can be seized and applied toward restitution for her victims. Since you were her first victim, and the theft of your inheritance was what enabled her to develop these skills, you have priority claim on those assets. How much money are we talking about? Based on the banking records we've subpoenaed, your sister has approximately $140,000 in various accounts that can be directly traced to her forgery business. That money can be seized immediately and held for victim restitution. What about my parents? Their situation is more complex but potentially even more devastating for them. The evidence shows they were aware of and participated in your sister's document forgery operation. Your father helped her research legal document formats, and your mother provided editing services for some of the fake academic records. They weren't just accessories to the theft of your inheritance. They were active participants in a federal fraud conspiracy. This revelation hit me harder than almost anything else I had discovered. My parents hadn't just stolen from me and tried to have me declared incompetent. They had been actively involved in helping Vanessa destroy other people's lives. The fake academic records that had nearly destroyed my university career weren't just one-off forgeries created to intimidate me. They were products of a sophisticated criminal operation that my entire family had been running together. Patricia, what are the implications for the civil case? We can now pursue damages not just for the theft of your inheritance, but for your role as the victim of an ongoing criminal enterprise. Under RICO statutes, that opens up the possibility of treble damages on a much larger scale. Instead of tripling just the $42,000 they stole from you, we can potentially triple the entire amount of damages you suffered as a result of their criminal organization. Which means what in dollar terms? Between the original theft, the attempted academic sabotage, the emotional distress, the lost opportunities, and your role as the primary victim of their criminal enterprise, we're looking at potential damages of $500,000 or more. $500,000. More than 10 times what they had originally stolen from me. But the most satisfying development came when I received a call from the financial aid office at Riverside University. The federal investigation into Vanessa's document forgery business had revealed that several students at my university had purchased fake transcripts to qualify for need-based financial aid they weren't entitled to receive. Miss Winters, the financial aid director explained, the fraudulent aid applications have freed up substantial scholarship money that was originally allocated based on false information. Based on your academic performance and the financial hardship you've endured as a result of this fraud, the university is prepared to offer you a full academic scholarship for your graduate program, plus a $15,000 annual research stipend. A full scholarship plus stipend. The very crime that was meant to destroy my academic future had actually opened up opportunities I never would have had otherwise. The irony was perfect. Vanessa's criminal skills, developed by stealing from me, had created a document forgery business that ultimately provided me with more financial support for my education than I would have received from my original inheritance. But my family wasn't going down without a fight. Robert Caldwell had requested a meeting with me and Patricia, claiming that his clients had new information that could change everything about the case. We met in Patricia's office on a Friday afternoon, with Caldwell looking significantly less confident than he had during our previous encounters. "Miss Winters," he began, "my clients want you to know that they're prepared to provide full cooperation with the federal investigation into the document." Patricia leaned forward. "Mr. Caldwell, your clients weren't just passive participants in this fraud ring. They were founding members. What information could they possibly have that would justify reduced charges? They've discovered that several of their clients were connected to much larger criminal organizations. Identity theft rings, immigration fraud operations, insurance fraud schemes. My clients' cooperation could help federal authorities dismantle criminal networks worth millions of dollars." I looked at Patricia, who gave me a slight nod indicating that this might actually be valuable to prosecutors. What are they asking for in return? Reduced charges that would allow them to avoid federal prison time. They're willing to plead guilty to state charges and accept probation with full restitution, plus cooperation in civil proceedings. And if I refuse? Caldwell's expression darkened. "Miss Winters, if this goes to trial, my clients are prepared to argue that you were not just aware of the document forgery business, but that you were actually the one who gave them the idea for it." I stared at him in disbelief. "They're going to claim that I masterminded the criminal enterprise that victimized me? They're going to testify that you approached them with the idea of creating fake academic documents to improve your transcript, and that the operation grew from there. They have documentation suggesting that you were involved from the beginning. More forgeries. Even facing federal charges and financial ruin, my family was still creating false evidence to try to destroy me. But this time, I wasn't intimidated. I was furious. Mr. Caldwell," I said, standing up from my chair, "you can tell your clients that I reject their offer completely. If they want to add perjury and false testimony to their list of federal charges, that's their choice. But I'm not negotiating with criminals who are still actively trying to frame me for their crimes. Miss Winters, you're making a serious mistake. If this goes to trial, when this goes to trial," I corrected, "your clients are going to face every single charge the prosecutors can bring. And when they're sentenced to decades in federal prison, they'll have plenty of time to think about what happens when you underestimate someone you think is helpless." As Caldwell left Patricia's office, she turned to me with a smile I had never seen before. "Natalie, I've been practicing law for 15 years, and I've never seen anyone handle criminal intimidation with such composure. Your family picked the wrong person to mess with." "They certainly did," I agreed, "and they're about to find out exactly how wrong they were." The federal trial began 6 months later in the downtown courthouse, with my family facing a total of 47 felony charges between them. The prosecution had built their case methodically, using every piece of evidence I had gathered plus the extensive digital forensics that revealed the full scope of the document forgery operation. Assistant U.S. Attorney Jennifer Walsh, who was leading the prosecution, had warned me that my family's defense team would try to paint me as the real criminal, but nothing could have prepared me for the audacity of their strategy when it was finally revealed in court. During opening statements, Robert Caldwell stood before the jury and claimed that I had been the mastermind behind the entire operation. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, he said with the confidence of someone who believed his own lies. The prosecution wants you to believe that these 3 family members conspired to steal from an innocent college student. But the evidence will show that Natalie Winters was not a victim. She was the architect of an elaborate fraud scheme designed to steal from her own family and innocent people across multiple states. According to Caldwell's opening statement, Miss Winters will testify that she discovered this alleged theft through bank records, Caldwell continued, but the evidence will show that she was the one who authorized every single withdrawal. She created an elaborate paper trail to frame her own family members because they refused to participate in her criminal scheme. I watched the jury's faces as Caldwell spun his fantasy, trying to gauge whether any of them might actually believe such an absurd story. A few looked skeptical, but others seemed to be considering the possibility that a young woman might be capable of framing her own family. The prosecution's case took 3 weeks to present, and it was devastating. Jennifer Walsh methodically walked the jury through every piece of evidence: the bank records showing systematic theft, the timeline matching withdrawals to Vanessa's social media posts, the forged documents found on Vanessa's computers, the encrypted client files containing hundreds of fraudulent documents. But the most damaging testimony came from Derek Walsh, the banker who had been manipulated by my father's elaborate deception campaign. Mr. Winters showed me what appeared to be academic records indicating that his daughter was failing multiple classes, Derek testified. He had documentation of allegedly irresponsible spending, and he expressed genuine concern about her mental health and financial decision-making abilities. "Did you believe these documents were authentic at the time?" Jennifer Walsh asked. "I did. They were professionally created and appeared completely legitimate. It wasn't until I met with Miss Winters myself that I realized she was nothing like the troubled young woman her father had described." "What convinced you that the documents were forgeries?" "When I saw Miss Winters' actual academic transcript, which showed a 3.8 GPA, I realized that the failing grades her father had shown me were impossible. Also, the financial records he provided showed spending patterns that were completely inconsistent with how Miss Winters actually lived. She was clearly struggling financially, not living extravagantly as the forged documents suggested." The defense's case, when it finally began, was even more surreal than I had anticipated. They actually put my father on the witness stand to testify that I had been the one who suggested creating fake documents. "Natalie came to us in her junior year," my father testified, looking directly at me with an expression of manufactured sadness. "She said she was worried about getting into graduate school with her grades, and she asked if we knew anyone who could help her create better transcripts." "And how did you respond?" Caldwell asked. "We told her absolutely not. Patricia and I raised our children to be honest and hardworking. We would never participate in academic fraud." What happened next? Natalie became increasingly agitated and desperate. She started talking about how unfair it was that other students were probably cheating while she was being honest. She said if the system was rigged, she might as well rig it in her favor too. I sat in the witness gallery listening to my father perjure himself with elaborate stories about conversations that had never happened, watching him destroy whatever remnants of family relationship might have survived this ordeal. "Mr. Winters," Caldwell continued, "did there come a time when money began disappearing from your daughter's trust account? We found out she was using the money to pay for the document forgery operation she had convinced Vanessa to help her with. Our daughter had essentially blackmailed her sister into participating by threatening to report some minor tax issues Vanessa had if she didn't cooperate. The lies were so elaborate and detailed that I almost admired their creativity. Almost. But when it came time for my cross-examination of my father, I was ready. Jennifer Walsh had prepared me extensively for this moment, and I had insisted on conducting the cross-examination myself. I wanted my father to look me in the eye while I destroyed his lies piece by piece. "Mr. Winters," I began, standing up from the prosecution table, "you testified that I approached you about creating fake academic documents. When exactly did this conversation take place?" "I don't remember the exact date. Sometime in your junior year." Would it surprise you to learn that my GPA during junior year was 3.9, and that I was already being recruited by graduate programs based on my legitimate academic performance? Grades aren't everything. You were still worried about competition. I walked over to the evidence table and picked up a folder. Mr. Winters, I'm showing you Prosecution Exhibit 127. This is an email you sent to Derek Walsh in September, describing my supposed academic problems. Do you see the date on this email? My father squinted at the document. September 15th. And Mr. Winters, I'm now showing you Prosecution Exhibit 128. This is my official transcript from Riverside University, showing my grades through September 15th of that year. Can you tell the jury what my GPA was at that time? There was a long pause as my father realized he had been caught in an obvious lie. I don't recall. It was 3.8, Mr. Winters. So you were telling the banker that I was failing classes during the exact same period when I was maintaining nearly a 4.0 GPA. How do you explain that discrepancy? I may have been mistaken about the timing. Or you may have been lying to manipulate the bank into giving you information about how to steal my inheritance. Objection, Caldwell shouted. Sustained, the judge ruled. But the damage was done. I spent the next hour systematically destroying every aspect of my father's testimony, using the digital evidence to prove that he couldn't have been telling the truth about any of the conversations he claimed we had had. When Vanessa took the stand, her performance was even worse. She tried to maintain the fiction that I had been the mastermind, but her stories were inconsistent and she clearly hadn't been prepared for the level of detailed questioning I was capable of. Miss Winters, I said during her cross-examination, you testified that I threatened to report tax issues if you didn't help me with document forgery. What tax issues were you referring to? Just, some mistakes I had made on my returns. Can you be more specific? What kind of mistakes? I don't remember exactly. Miss Winters, you're under oath. You're testifying that I blackmailed you with threats to report specific tax violations, but you can't remember what those violations were? It was a long time ago. It was 18 months ago. And you're saying you can't remember the specific tax crimes that were serious enough for me to use as blackmail against you? Vanessa's face was flushed, but you are so concerned about these non-existent tax crimes that you were willing to participate in an elaborate document forgery operation rather than risk having them reported. Yes. Miss Winters, doesn't it seem more likely that you participated in the document forgery operation because you were making substantial amounts of money from it, not because you were being blackmailed about imaginary tax problems? Vanessa stared at me with pure hatred. You did this to us. You destroyed our family because you couldn't stand that Mom and Dad helped me when I needed it. Miss Winters, I destroyed our family? You stole my inheritance, tried to have me declared mentally incompetent, submitted forged documents to my university, and built a criminal enterprise that victimized dozens of innocent people. But I destroyed our family? You could have just accepted that family helps family and moved on with your life. And you could have gotten a job instead of stealing from me and running a document forgery business. The jury deliberated for less than 4 hours. When they returned, the foreman read 47 guilty verdicts, one for each charge against all 3 defendants. Judge Harrison, who had presided over the trial with remarkable patience, delivered the sentences 2 weeks later. Vanessa received 25 years in federal prison for racketeering, wire fraud, mail fraud, and conspiracy. My father received 15 years for conspiracy, fraud, and elder abuse. My mother received 12 years for conspiracy and fraud. Combined, my family was facing over 50 years in federal prison. But for me, the most satisfying moment wasn't when the sentences were read. It was when Judge Harrison addressed the defendants directly, before imposing those sentences. In 30 years on the bench, he said, I have never seen a more callous betrayal of family trust. You didn't just steal money from your own daughter and sister. You tried to destroy her future when she had the courage to stand up to you. You forged documents, manipulated institutions, and built a criminal enterprise that victimized dozens of innocent people. And even when faced with overwhelming evidence of your guilt, you continued to lie and tried to blame the very person you had victimized. He looked directly at my parents. Mr. and Mrs. Winters, you failed in the most fundamental duty of parenthood, protecting your child. Instead, you exploited her love and trust to steal from her, and when she discovered your theft, you tried to destroy her completely. Then he turned to Vanessa. Miss Winters, you turned your family's betrayal into a business model, using the skills you developed to defraud your sister, to victimize dozens of other people. Your criminal enterprise has caused immeasurable harm to innocent victims across multiple states. As the marshals led my family away in handcuffs, not one of them looked back at me. Even at the very end, they couldn't acknowledge what they had done or show any remorse for the pain they had caused. But I felt no sadness watching them disappear into the federal prison system. They had taught me that family isn't about blood. It's about loyalty, respect, and love. Since they had never shown me any of those things, they had never really been my family at all. The civil judgment came through 3 months after the criminal sentencing, and the final numbers exceeded even Patricia Blackwood's most optimistic projections. The court awarded me $847,000 in total damages, $126,000 in treble damages for the original theft, $200,000 in punitive damages for the fraud conspiracy, $180,000 in forfeited criminal proceeds from Vanessa's document business, $150,000 for intentional infliction of emotional distress, and $191,000 in attorney fees and court costs, almost exactly 20 times what they had originally stolen from me. The asset seizure process moved quickly once the judgment was finalized. My parents' house sold at auction for $375,000. Their retirement accounts were frozen and liquidated for $240,000, and their investment portfolio added another $58,000. Vanessa's BMW was repossessed and sold. Her bank accounts were emptied, and even her jewelry and electronics were seized to satisfy the judgment. But the most standing in the empty living room, where my family had confronted me about being selfish for wanting my inheritance back, I felt a sense of completion that I hadn't expected. This house, which had once represented everything I thought I'd lost when my family betrayed me, was now mine. Not because they had given it to me, but because I had taken it from them through the legal system they had tried to use against me. I decided to keep the house, but not as a residence. After consulting with a local nonprofit organization, I converted it into a resource center for elder abuse victims, people who had been financially exploited by their own family members, just like I had been. The irony was perfect. The house my parents had used as collateral for their fraud against me was now being used to help other people who had suffered similar betrayals. The Elder Abuse Center opened 6 months later, funded by a combination of the remaining civil judgment money and grants from state victim assistance programs. We offered legal aid, financial counseling, and emotional support for elderly people whose families had stolen from them, manipulated them, or tried to have them declared incompetent for financial gain. Derek Walsh, the banker who had helped expose my family's fraud, joined our board of directors and developed training programs to help financial institutions identify and prevent family-based elder abuse. Professor Morrison, who had been so supportive during the academic misconduct crisis, helped establish partnerships with universities to create awareness programs about document forgery and academic fraud. But the most meaningful partnership came from an unexpected source. The federal prosecutor's office had connected me with other victims of Vanessa's document forgery business, and many of them became founding supporters of the Elder Abuse Center. One of those victims was Eleanor Chen, a 78-year-old woman whose adult son had purchased fake medical documents from Vanessa to fraudulently claim power of attorney over his mother's finances. Eleanor had lost over $200,000 before discovering the fraud, and her son was now serving 8 years in federal prison for elder abuse and conspiracy. Natalie, Eleanor told me during the center's opening ceremony. "What your family did to you was terrible, but look what you've built from it. You've created something that's going to help hundreds of people who thought they had nowhere to turn." She was right. By the end of our first year, the Elder Abuse Center had assisted over 300 victims of family financial fraud, helping them recover more than $2.8 million in stolen assets and securing criminal convictions against 47 family members who had exploited their elderly relatives. My academic career had flourished as well. The full scholarship and research stipend that resulted from exposing the university fraud had allowed me to complete my master's degree without any financial stress. My thesis on family-based financial fraud, detection, prevention, and recovery had been published in 3 academic journals and was being used by law enforcement agencies across the country as a training resource. Sterling Financial had not only honored their original job offer, but had promoted me to a senior analyst position specifically focused on financial fraud investigation. My unique combination of academic knowledge and personal experience with fraud had made me one of the most sought-after experts in the field. But perhaps the most unexpected development was the relationship I had built with Derek Walsh's daughter, Amanda, who had become the center's full-time legal coordinator. Amanda was a recent law school graduate who specialized in elder law, and she had been instrumental in developing the center's legal aid programs. "You know," Amanda said as we reviewed case files in what used to be my parents' dining room, "when my father first told me about your case, I thought it was the most depressing family story I'd ever heard. But seeing what you've accomplished since then, I think it's actually..." 3 years after the trial, I received an unexpected letter in the mail. It was from my mother, written from the federal prison where she was serving her 12-year sentence. "Natalie," the letter began, "I know you probably don't want to hear from me, but I needed to tell you something I should have said a long time ago. You were right about everything. We were wrong to take your money, wrong to try to cover it up, and especially wrong to try to blame you for standing up to us. I understand why you can't forgive us, and I don't expect you to. But I want you to know that I'm proud of what you've accomplished with the Elder Abuse Center." Vanessa showed me an article about it that someone mailed to her. "Even though we'll never be a family again, I'm glad that something good came out of all the terrible things we did to you." I read the letter twice, then filed it away without responding. My mother was right. I couldn't forgive them, and we would never be a family again. But I also didn't feel the anger toward them that I once had. They had taught me important lessons about strength, independence, and the difference between family by blood and family by choice. The people who worked at the Elder Abuse Center, the victims we helped, the professionals who supported our mission, these were my real family now. We had chosen each other based on shared values and common goals, not accidents of birth. 5 years after the trial, I was invited to speak at a national conference on elder abuse prevention. Standing at the podium, looking out at an audience of law enforcement officers, social workers, attorneys, and victim advocates, I told the story of how my family's betrayal had led me to discover my own strength and purpose. 5 years ago, I concluded, my family tried to steal my future by taking my inheritance and attempting to have me declared mentally incompetent. They thought they were dealing with a naive young woman who would accept their lies and manipulation rather than fight back. They were wrong about that, just like they were wrong about everything else. But here's what they didn't understand. When you steal someone's past, you don't necessarily destroy their future. Sometimes you just motivate them to build a better future than they ever could have imagined. Sometimes the best revenge isn't revenge at all. It's success beyond anything your enemies thought possible. My family took $42,000 from me and tried to destroy my life. In response, I've built a career helping other people recover millions of dollars from similar fraud, created an organization that has assisted hundreds of victims, and found a sense of purpose that I never would have discovered if they hadn't betrayed me so completely. They thought they were taking everything from me. Instead, they gave me everything I needed to become who I was meant to be. As I left the conference that day, I thought about the woman I had been 5 years earlier, naive, trusting, willing to believe that family loyalty meant accepting mistreatment without complaint. That woman was gone, replaced by someone stronger, wiser, and more capable than I ever could have imagined. My family had destroyed the person I used to be, but in doing so, they had forced me to become the person I was always meant to be. Someone who fights back, someone who wins, and someone who uses those victories to help other people find their own strength. Standing outside the convention center looking up at the city skyline, I realized something that would have amazed the naive 22-year-old who had first discovered her inheritance was missing. I was grateful. Not grateful for what they had done to me, but grateful for who I had become in spite of it. My family had tried to steal my future, but instead they had given me a better one than I ever could have planned for myself. And that, I thought as I walked toward my car, was the ultimate victory, turning their betrayal into my triumph, their cruelty into my compassion, and their attempt to destroy me into the foundation for helping hundreds of other people rebuild their lives. They had wanted to break me. Instead, they had made me unbreakable. May ses. The rest, as they say, was just the beginning. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.